Out now. Major Keller's voice cut through the hangar like a blade. This isn't a storage closet for retired janitors. Elena Duarte stood motionless beside the experimental aircraft she'd just recalibrated. Silently, perfectly. Her grease-stained coveralls still bore the faded outline of a forgotten patch. Test pilot support. Combat rescue. No one stepped in. Not the cadets watching. Not the officers who knew what she had once done. She said nothing. Instead, she pulled off her gloves, dropped her ID badge in the utility bin, and walked away. The aircraft she'd just saved? It was scheduled for a live demonstration in less than 1 hour, with a pilot inside who didn't know the danger still hiding in the code. If you believe no veteran should be treated like this, type respect below. Elena Duarte arrived at Falcon Ridge Air Base each morning before the sun rose above the hangar doors. She never clocked in late, never complained, never asked for recognition. Her badge now read, Technical Ground Support Temporary Contractor, a title that erased nearly 2 decades of aviation history. What no one saw were the scars beneath the collar of her coveralls, or the folders she kept at home with commendations signed by names now etched into plaques at the Pentagon. At 48, she had trained pilots who now flew missions she was no longer allowed to witness. After a budget cut and reorganization, she had been quietly reassigned, not because of performance, but because no one wanted to explain why a woman with no degree but 2,000 logged hours could outperform their newest recruits. This morning, she stood near the tarmac, clipboard in hand, conducting final checks on XR-22 Talon, an experimental VTOL aircraft scheduled for a public demonstration. She'd noticed something odd during yesterday's diagnostics, a latency in the auxiliary thrust vectoring, minor on paper, catastrophic at altitude. She flagged it, filed the report, highlighted it in red. No one responded. Now, Cadet Lawton, the son of a regional senator, was pre-flighting the Talon, waving at his friends, laughing as if he were stepping onto a parade float. "Ma'am," he called out with a smirk, "you sure the coffee's hot today?" "That's all we need you for, right?" Elena didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the aircraft and tapped the intake panel. "This needs to be rechecked. There's unresolved telemetry." He rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I'll get to it after I finish posing for the camera. Lighten up." From across the hangar, Major Keller watched the exchange. His voice echoed over the PA. "Duarte, that's enough. You've already submitted your expert opinion, and our engineers cleared it. Step away from the aircraft." She didn't move. "I said step back. Or do I need to remind you of your current job description?" Slowly, Elena lowered her hand from the fuselage. She gave a short nod to Lawton, then turned and walked back toward the operations bench. Behind her, Keller's voice boomed once more. "And lose the patch, Duarte. You're not combat rescue anymore. Stop pretending." Heads turned. The younger cadets smirked. Others, older, looked away in silence. Not one person stood up. Elena reached up and touched the small patch stitched onto her sleeve. Faded red and black thread, a winged emblem with the words, "That others may live." Her brother had worn the same one before he died during an airlift in Kandahar. She didn't speak. Instead, she removed the patch with slow, deliberate fingers, folded it twice, slid it into her breast pocket. She returned to her post without a word. The moment passed quickly. Lawton boarded the Talon, strapping in as photographers assembled. Journalists gathered on the edge of the airstrip, ready for a historic demonstration. Nobody mentioned Elena's warning. Nobody mentioned the technician who had flagged the anomaly. Nobody mentioned the woman with more hours in a simulator than most of them had in their entire careers. By mid-morning, she was back in the storage annex, sorting equipment returns from the last drill. A few techs walked past without speaking. One of them, Reyes, younger and fresh from the academy, paused for a second as if to say something, then didn't. She heard laughter again, distant but familiar. Cadets were watching the pre-launch footage on someone's phone. Lawton posing, waving, climbing in like a hero. As she reached for a crate of signal fuses, she caught sight of her own reflection in the metal. Same gray coveralls, same badge, same hands that had once been covered in jet fuel, gripping the yoke of a rescue transport in a storm over the Atlantic. Now labeled a technician, a liability, a has-been. And still, she said nothing. The following day, Elena found her toolbox relocated. It wasn't in Bay 6 where she'd always kept it, labeled with her name in black marker from years ago. It had been moved to the janitorial supply closet at the back of the facility, tucked behind mops, paint cans, and a box labeled defective headsets. A note had been taped to the lid. No signature. Just 4 words scrawled in blue ink. Stay in your lane. She didn't react. Just lifted the box with both hands, balanced its weight, and carried it back into the hangar without a word. That afternoon, a new rotation list was posted outside the operations room. Elena's name had been removed entirely from diagnostic teams and reassigned to equipment disposal, sorting expired flares and disposing of empty fuel canisters. Her access to the XR-22's logs had also been revoked. She stood quietly in front of the panel where the changes were posted. Around her, a few techs exchanged glances. No one spoke. Reyes passed behind her, hesitating once more. "Ma'am," he started, voice low. But before the sentence could form, Major Keller appeared from the adjoining corridor. "Rodriguez, let's go," he barked at Reyes. "Leave the contractor alone. She's done with the real work." Elena stepped aside without protest. Keller didn't stop. "This base isn't a museum. If you want to live in the past, Duarte, hang a plaque on your garage. Stop wasting our time with ghost stories and outdated protocols." The laughter from 2 cadets behind him wasn't loud, but it was enough. Elena returned to the fuel disposal bay. As she sorted through the contents of a damaged crate, she heard the high-pitched whine of the XR-22 spooling up outside. Another live demo, this time without any internal review of the software bug she'd reported. She looked through the small maintenance window. The Talon was already taxiing. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a container of decommissioned igniters. She steadied them by gripping the edge of the bench and breathing once. Deep. Silent. Later that evening, she discovered someone had logged into her personnel account and modified her digital profile. Where it once listed her as Flight System Support, REDAR, it now read, Contractor, Non-Flight Qualified. Her credentials had been erased. In the cafeteria, 3 cadets sat near her, loudly discussing how standards were getting too flexible and how you used to have to earn your place around here. Their voices carried. None of them looked at her directly. They didn't need to. By the next week, a mock bulletin had appeared in the break room, pinned just above the coffee machine. Meet the new face of Falcon Ridge Excellence. Below it, a photoshopped image of Elena's face pasted onto a cartoon janitor holding a mop. It stayed up for 3 days. No one removed it. Not the base supervisor, not the senior engineers, not even the younger techs who whispered behind closed doors that it had gone too far. Elena saw it once, glanced at it, then returned to her checklist without comment. No one stood beside her, no one stood for her. That night in her small off-base apartment, she sat at the kitchen table under the dull hum of a fluorescent light. On the wall behind her, framed in dusty glass, hung a commendation letter from 14 years prior, signed by a general whose name now adorned the flight center. It read, "For exemplary performance in critical recovery operations under extreme duress." She read it once, then folded it down, then reached for the old flight manual she kept on a shelf no one touched. The one with her annotations, the one that included the rotor stabilization protocol no one ever credited her for, the one she had memorized, cover to cover. The next morning, Falcon Ridge was under lockdown protocol. An incoming weather front had grounded all non-essential flights, but the command insisted the XR-22 demonstration proceed as scheduled. VIPs from the Defense Procurement Division were already en route, and public relations couldn't afford another delay. Elena arrived before dawn, wearing the same gray coveralls. The badge on her chest still read non-flight qualified, though the corners were curling from wear. She knew they wouldn't let her near the XR-22 again. She didn't need to. She had memorized its schematics when it was still in prototype. She had trained with its first test team in Arizona. She had helped rebuild it after the second crash simulation, back when it was still just a name on a blackboard, Talon 1. At XR-635, she walked quietly into the backup systems terminal, a dim corridor at the far end of the diagnostics bay. It was rarely used, its lights flickering and its monitors often running outdated firmware. But it was still wired into the aircraft telemetry buffer. From a small folding chair beside a rusted console, she opened a blank notebook. Not a laptop, not a tablet. Just a worn spiral-bound pad with calculations handwritten in pen. She listened through a secondary audio feed to the pre-flight chatter coming from Hangar 2. Telemetry green, fuel load balanced, primary navigation nominal. The problem was she knew the system wasn't green. She knew the Talon's pitch trim would overcompensate above 8,000 feet, especially in sudden lateral crosswind. It was the same flaw she'd documented in her personal field test a decade ago, logged, filed, and forgotten when the project changed hands. She had written a countermeasure back then, a series of manual adjustments to counter the lag. Precise, delicate, dangerously complex under pressure. No one else knew them, and no one had asked. She took a breath and opened the drawer beneath the console. Inside was a battered USB stick, once part of a flight instructor's kit she'd been given long ago. She didn't plug it in. She didn't need to. The procedures were already etched into her notes, her muscle memory, her training. Outside, the sound of the aircraft engine filled the morning air. On the monitor, she watched the XR-22 system diagnostics begin to stutter. Minor drops, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to confirm what she feared. The cadet flying today was Lieutenant Braxton, new, ambitious, and untested in real flight correction. She'd seen his simulator scores. Fast hands, good instincts, but no backup plan if the aircraft stopped behaving. She took her pen and began to write. A full-page sequence, line by line. Manual override sequence. Roll trim reset. Thrust adjustment delay sync. Emergency pitch stabilization. When the page was full, she tore it cleanly from the notebook, folded it in thirds. She stood and walked to the break room. It was empty. Everyone was at the launch field or watching the feed. She slid the folded paper beneath a sealed envelope addressed to Lieutenant Command N. Braxton. The pilot's post-flight debriefing kit, placed on the bench in preparation for the afternoon. She didn't leave a note, didn't sign her name, didn't look around to see if anyone noticed. Then she turned, walked back through the hallway, and resumed her shift inventorying broken headset jacks no one would ever repair. The sheet of paper sat there quietly, unread. No one mentioned it, no one knew it was there, but it was, and it held every answer Braxton might need if the sky turned against him. Elena said nothing that day, just as she always had. By midday, the winds had shifted. Thin cloud bands stretched over the mountains beyond Falcon Ridge, and the pressure dropped by the hour. Still, the order came through. The XR-22 Talon would launch on time. On the field, cadets lined up in uniform rows, faces tilted upward toward the sky. VIPs in dress blues sipped coffee behind the rope line, murmuring about efficiency and funding. Two high-ranking procurement officials arrived in black sedans and were escorted to the observation platform. Cameras rolled. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Braxton double-checked his readings. Everything looked normal. Until it didn't. At 9,500 feet, a subtle tremor passed through the yoke. At 10,000, the aircraft pitched slightly to the left. Not much. Just enough to feel off. Control, I'm getting minor instability in pitch trim. Requesting confirmation of diagnostics. From the tower, Major Keller's voice came through flat and firm. Maintain course, Lieutenant. We've got eyes on. Executing demonstration pattern now. The aircraft climbed higher. Elena, standing behind the parts desk, heard the chatter coming from the monitor in the break room, the same one no one thought she used. The tremor in Braxton's voice wasn't panic, but it wasn't confidence either. Control, turbulence is increasing. I'm correcting but getting feedback loop delays. Elena moved, not quickly, not dramatically. She stepped into the hallway and turned left toward the secondary control bay, the one she'd sat in that morning. On screen, the XR-22 began to wobble, caught between wind shear and software lag. The trim system was auto-correcting in conflict with manual inputs. A silent fight inside the machine. Major Keller's voice again. "Stay the course. You're fine. Push through the turbulence." "No, he's not," Elena whispered. In the main control tower, technicians began to stir. One of them raised a brow. "Telemetry's showing minor trim instability," he said. Keller shook his head. "Ignore it. He'll ride it out. We've run this sim a dozen times." Another voice interrupted, steady, low, unfamiliar. "Have you run it with the old stabilization protocol?" Everyone turned. Standing in the back of the room was Colonel Harlan Griggs, retired, former head of combat aviation development, and recipient of 2 distinguished flying crosses. He wore no insignia now, just a dark overcoat and a hard stare. Keller blinked. "Sir, this is a secured area, may I ask?" "You may not." Griggs stepped forward. "That aircraft is flying blind through a known instability loop. And you ignored the only person on this base who knew how to fix it." Keller's face reddened. "This is under control. Braxton is fully qualified. Then why is he losing altitude?" All eyes turned to the monitor. Altitude, 9,300 feet. Velocity, erratic. Yaw, drifting. Control, I'm experiencing increased vibration. Can't stabilize. Braxton's voice cracked through the speaker. "Requesting immediate instruction. Please advise." The tower went silent. Until another voice broke through, calm, clear, and coming from an open channel no one had noticed. "Lieutenant Braxton," Elena said softly. "This is Duarte. Read me." There was a beat of hesitation. "Copy that. I need you to disengage auto trim, manually adjust pitch at 62% throttle, then apply counter yaw using lateral left thrust only. Do not, repeat, do not toggle primary override." Keller lunged toward the console. "Shut that down. She's not authorized to—" Griggs blocked his path. "She's the only one in this room who knows what she's doing. Let her speak." On screen, the aircraft shuddered once more, then began to stabilize. Braxton's voice came through again, tighter but focused. "Trim holding, adjusting pitch, following your lead, Duarte." For the next 3 minutes, the only sound in the room was her voice guiding him through the descent. When the XR-22 touched down on the emergency strip near the auxiliary field, intact, smoking but upright, the crowd watching from the platform burst into stunned applause. Back in the tower, no one moved. Colonel Griggs turned slowly toward Keller. "You've spent 3 months burying the only mind on this base who understood what we were flying. You put a cadet at risk. You disregarded a veteran's expertise. And today, you nearly let someone die because of your pride." Keller didn't respond. He couldn't. Griggs stepped toward the open comm. "Ms. Duarte," he said, "report to the command office, effective immediately." "Sir?" She answered, cautious. "You're reinstated. Full clearance. You're where you should have been all along. If you believe dignity always finds its voice, hit like." 3 days later, the patch returned, not in a box, not in a ceremony, not with cameras or speeches. It was waiting on Elena's workbench, folded neatly beside a new uniform package, still sealed, bearing a tag that read, "Senior Flight Systems Officer, Command Access Level 2. No one claimed responsibility for the delivery, but someone had placed the folded patch, red, black, worn, on top of the uniform, exactly where it had been removed. Elena stood in silence for a moment. Then, with slow, steady fingers, she lifted the patch and pressed it to her chest. The fabric had been stitched over once. She could see the careful repair where the threads had unraveled. Someone had taken time to mend it, without erasing its age. That afternoon, in a quiet corner of the hangar, the brass plaque on the employee of the quarter wall was replaced. The photo now showed a woman standing in front of the XR-22, arms crossed, eyes steady, wind pulling lightly at her coveralls. Beneath it, the inscription read, "Elena Duarte Combat Rescue, Flight Systems Pioneer." She didn't ask for permission to save lives, only the chance to keep trying. No one said a word when the photo went up. No one needed to. In the following weeks, Subtle changes began to ripple across the base. The simulation center introduced a new protocol, Duarte 7, as part of the XR-22's emergency response checklist. Training cadets began asking different kinds of questions about edge case anomalies, about pilot instincts, about how to listen to a system and to people. One afternoon, Lieutenant Braxton stopped by the diagnostics bay. He didn't bring reporters or formal letters, just a handwritten note folded once, handed to her without preface. It read, "Thank you for hearing me before I even spoke." Elena nodded once, then returned to her work. No need for applause, but the most visible change came near the front of the base. Where a framed bulletin board had once listed flight rosters and announcements, there now hung a single brass placard under glass. Excellence has no rank. Below it, the names of every technician, mechanic, and support veteran who had contributed to the XR-22 survival during its prototype phase. Names long buried in classified documents or passed over during restructuring. Elena's name was there too, not at the top, not in bold, just where it belonged. At the hangar entrance, new recruits began saluting as they passed the display, not because it was required, because someone had finally shown them what respect looked like in silence. On a rainy Thursday morning, weeks after the incident, Elena entered the command center to find her badge updated in the system. It no longer read non-flight qualified. It read, Duarte, E. Flight Systems Lead, Emergency Protocols Specialist. She smiled quietly, then slipped the badge into her chest pocket beside the old patch. That afternoon, a cadet asked if she'd review a navigation report. Hesitant, uncertain, Elena pulled up a stool beside her. "Show me where you think the data starts lying," she said. "Then we'll figure out what it's really trying to say." The girl smiled, surprised. "You read data like it's a person." "No," Elena said gently. "I read people like they're pilots. Everyone's just trying not to crash." That evening, she walked the length of the tarmac alone. The XR-22 sat idle in the distance, calm, whole. Her steps were slow, measured. The wind tugged at the collar of her jacket. The rescue patch on her sleeve caught a glint of sun. And for once, no one tried to stop her. No one told her she didn't belong. No one looked away. At the very edge of the runway, she stood still, closed her eyes, and finally, breathed. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, subscribe now. Thank you for trusting me to bring this story to life. Whenever you're ready for the next one, I'll be here.